electric.
Well, it's location.
Yeah, let's see.
And I don't think Denmark doesn't have nearly the population density that we have. No, I mean, this concept. I mean, obviously the grid has got to become much more flexible at taking inputs and doing outputs than it is today.
I'd like to welcome you to the monthly meeting of the Boston Area Solar Energy Association. Up until recently, we've been a chapter of NESI, the Northeast Sustainable Energy Association. We still have a good relationship with them and encourage you to become members of that organization. They've changed their chapter structure, so we're no longer a chapter of them. But probably we share the same audiences. A number of you are probably NESI members, I hope. But we'll continue these programs and would encourage donations to help offset the cost of these programs. We also encourage people to have a little public service announcement if they care to about any programs that are in like-minded space around here. We'd like to also mention that one of the programs BASI does each year is sponsor and encourage the Junior Solar Sprint program, which is a program where middle school kids take their kit, which is a PV panel, 3-watt panel like this, and a DC motor, and put the rest of the stuff together to make a model solar car and race it. The race this year is on May 17th with the rain date the following day, Sunday the 18th, at the MIT track. And if anybody would like to help volunteer, we're still looking for a couple of judges and people to help on the lines. We usually have, last year we had maybe 50 to 60 cars and 200 or 300 kids. Let's do that. But if there's any events that anybody would like to make an announcement of, say. Yep.
I publish a weekly listing of events, energy events, and other events at the colleges and universities in the community in a 5-mile radius around Cambridge. If you're interested, it's hub events, hubevents.blogspot.com. If that's interesting to you, my email is there. Email me and I'll educate an analyst is free. There's hundreds and hundreds of things happening around energy at MIT, Harvard, BU, BC, at Northeastern, and Tufts.
Yeah, thank you, George. George does a lot of legwork for people to kind of boil down interesting events around. So if you sign up for his newsletter and attend some of those, you'll see his work for a while. Okay, so I want to introduce Ambrose Spencer. Just for the introduction, I wrote for the announcement from what he provided me. All right, so Ambrose describes himself as a technician, independent researcher. Our attendees know him as a passionate and knowledgeable participant, familiar face here, always providing a deep perspective on many technical and policy matters. He was raised in Cambridge through MIT Draper Labs, working in electronics instrumentation, and a lot of social involvement at Mass Cap, interfaith organizing, Cambridge Sustainable Housing, interested in energy and housing since the 70s, and kind of that it makes him a sort of defined character of this region. Some of the strengths that we have in Cambridge really show through in Ambrose. Let's see, current work. So he's been telling me about Denmark for a while, and we finally had the opportunity to have him present here today. So this is going to be very interesting because we find, for a connoisseur like Ambrose, some in-depth analysis of what Denmark is doing and how we could possibly benefit from maybe following their example, or who knows if we ever can, but at least we'd have an example to follow. Someone's blazing the path.
There's lots of other people. I was lucky enough to be taught by people who were just really far along with their time.
Well, so he's participated in NESI, BASI a lot. I kind of thought he was our little secret, but I think the audience here is testament that he's a little bit more well-known than beyond this room. So we welcome Ambrose tonight and all of you to the forum.
I want to dedicate this presentation to the notion of compassion, which is shared by the major religions. And I just wanted to make that up front. I'm giving this lecture tonight. It's the second time I've done a lecture like this because I'd like to get the University of Massachusetts to set up an elective course that will get students to make model runs using something called Energy Plan, which the Danes had written 10 years ago for the EU. So I thought that what I would do is I would start with a list of the lectures, the content that would be in the course. And I'm going to start by, I'm not sure whether I want to do this or the home first. I think I'll do the home first. Okay.
I'm going to lower some lights for you and I can advance those slides as well.
Yeah. I'm going to do this for a while, and then when I go over there. So, this is Amy Lovin's concept of the microgrid. And why don't we bring that back? I'll do that first so we don't have to do it.
You want to do that? Okay.
Yeah, I'll do it. Yeah. Can you turn that on? Okay. This is the crux of the problem in Denmark. You have wind, and typical Ambrose made a mistake. When you have wind, you can power all of your electrical loads, and at 20 or 25%, in other words, on an annual basis, there are times during, you'll see graphs of what a week looks like, and you'll see it'll carry the entire grid in the night. They had that happen in Germany. They had so much wind power in the northern German grid that they tried to channel it through a DC interconnect to South Germany, and they lost. The whole grid went down in northern Germany, not once but twice. So this 20 to 25% limit is being met in other countries. And the content of this course is to try to deal with this problem of renewable energy integration. So let's start with, there's no wind. I'm running central power plants, fuel. They have a lot of combined heat and power, which we call cogeneration. And the cogeneration generates electricity, which goes onto the grid. This is the electric grid. And it also makes heat. And that heat can be put to a thermal use. Now, as the wind starts to come up, you need less of this so you can throttle it back. When the wind becomes full, like at whatever that 20 to 25% is, this thing's down to nothing. In Denmark, the utility wants to see 30% of the load on the grid at any one time for voltage and frequency control. And they'd like to be able to dispatch these in units. And that's being done now. but I wanted to introduce you to this problem. Now the CHPs are down and we're meeting that 20 to 25% limit. How can we move that limit out? The first way to do it is, at least during the winter, I can connect electric boilers to the wind. Before I run into the too much wind problem, if the CHPs are responding to an electrical call and I don't have enough heat, then we can modulate the CHP downwards, but now I can't supply the heat. I have another type of boiler, which is called a fuel boiler, like the ones in your houses. And the wind comes up further. Now we go on electric boilers, and there's a big changeover in Denmark. They're replacing most of the boiler capacity in some district heating systems. District heating systems, you dig the street up and lay pipes and connect all the buildings for thermal. Then you put in a heat pump. Now the wind is not only carrying the electrical grid load, at the same time it's driving a heat pump and carrying loads at an economy of 2 to 3 times greater than the electric boiler. Now, a lot of you did not follow all of that. It's okay, because you say what you're going to say, and then you say it, and then when you're done, you say it again. So we'll go on. Okay, now I'm going to do this. Actually, all right. Mike is going to, I need a little light.
Yeah.
No, I can read. I can read. Okay. All right, next slide. Next slide. Oh my goodness.
Okay, you're right in front of me. Maybe I'm a little weird.
The slides are out of order. Henry, could you put the PDF one on instead, see whether that fixes it? So the first 2 slides that I expected coming up, is this the PDF version?
Yeah, PDF.
Okay, next slide.
Just keep going until you find it.
All right. What I expected to see was a picture of a 1 kW Honda cogeneration plant. Now, if you imagine one of those in an individual building with a heat pump, you have the basic structure. You could do this in a home. You have the basic structure so that each house, not just district heating plants, but each house would have the capacity to soak up excess electric production when there's too much of it, and when you have a heat load, by running that power to the heat pump and providing thermal service. Then when the wind dies down, you switch over to the cogeneration plant. And so those are the 2 slides. The reason I did that is because I wanted to make sure that for the people in this room, all of us are in America, and in America we don't have district heat. We probably won't have more than 20% district heat by 2030 or even 2050. Denmark doesn't think they can, I'm sorry, Germany doesn't think they can get beyond that. But Denmark's already at 50. So here's the list of the subject matter. So the first thing I do is introduce the students to the home. Then I introduce the students to the grid. I take them on a tour, and I get them to see substations. I get them to see transformer vaults and city streets. I get them to pay attention to pole-mounted transformers and electrical wires and point out the difference between primary voltage and secondary voltage and line voltage, so they could see, get an understanding. The next thing would be scales of size. As you go from small Honda individual home cogenerators up to big engines, you'll see some of them, you get somewhat more efficient. And the same thing happens with heat pumps. The next thing would be microgrids and district heat, and that's what the district heat, the microgrid picture that we started out with. So I only lost 2 or 3 pictures. Then I'll start into history and people by talking about the people who got Denmark going. They started doing district heat in the 1930s. In the 1940s, they researched wind under the German occupation. In the 50s, they started building windmills. And in 1976, the government got really interested in taking the country independent, energy independent. They didn't have North Sea oil and gas at that point. And what time is it now? Is it 7:45 or
7:53.
7:53?
Yeah.
Okay. And then, and I'll show you some pictures with some more history. These big black dots are central stations, and this is 1985. The little teeny dots are wind machines, and the middle-sized dots are CHP, most of it in district heat. Next slide. Now you can see that we've got a lot more of the middle-sized dots, which are combined cycle operating and district heating plants, and a lot more wind machines. This place here is called Jutland, this is called Zealand, and this is Thick, THY. They're already at 85% renewable energy. But there's a little fiction there because what they can't use, they ship out. And if you look at this picture, I'm not sure you can see it. You see that line? There's another line that's disappeared here. Denmark has been exporting wind to Sweden, Norway, and Germany. So they have to boogie. Next slide. Okay, here's the history. So, 1976, energy independence. And they passed some regulations on subsidy and all that. And through the big growth is in the 90s. Now, there's a change in government, which you'll see in the next slide. Do you see this line that's almost invisible? Okay. That's accumulated capacity in megawatts. So right back in 2007, they had 3 gigawatts of wind rated capacity, and they only have 6 million people, which is 500 watts per person. It's actually 342. And so I have one of the figures wrong. Accumulated windmills is the figure over here. There's 700 district heating station, next slide. All right, here's what's happening. These are windmills added per year and grid capacity. Let's see. Okay. So this is the net windmills connected each year. Now what happened here? Doink. What is sanitation? The neoconservatives took over. They ended a rule that said that if you wanted to build onshore windmills, you could only develop them, the people who live in the areas where the windmills go up have to own the plant. Denmark has been socialist, that's what the neoconservatives would say. They believe in democracy, planning, and regulation. And so what happened here was, whoops. So this sanitation, that's the neoconservative word for replacing 100 to 600 kW machines with 2 to 3 megawatt machines. So you can, and it stopped onshore wind almost dead. The people who took over the government wanted to transfer the development to offshore wind, which is sort of like nukes. It's the same bunch of people, the same mentality. It fits into the institutional model of utilities. Next slide. Okay, so they believe in democracy. Choice awareness is the term that gets translated from the Danish to explain to us the fact that if you want to have an operating democracy, you have to be able to articulate alternatives, which they call choices. So choice number 1 is the one that the utilities make. Choice number 2 is the one that the government makes. Choice number 3, oh, we didn't have one? I guess there's no choice. So this is just a bunch of procedures. It's all aimed at the promotion of new corporate democratic infrastructure. That's the foundation of what Denmark is doing. Alder in Denmark since 2000, when the energy plan was written for the EU, has been using that plan for adversary proceedings with the utilities and with the government, and also in negotiations with other agencies. Next slide. Okay, I'm not going to go through this, but the really, if you want to do, whoops, I'm sorry, I do that. Can you go back? Yeah. It's because the little laser button is in the middle. All right. This, I corresponded with the author of this computer program 15 years ago. And then they wrote a program for designing district heating stations. These are the plans that do all the forms of energy across all sectors. And have both an operational optimization section of the analysis and also a financial one. So we simulate the market. And you'll notice, looking at this, there's only one software that does both. Well, that's not actually true. This one does it. There are 4 of these models. Next slide. I'm not going to belabor this, but you start by putting the inputs in, and then you do the pre-calculation. Then you run the technical engineering simulation. Then you go over the financial and market, and you do that. And then you go back and forth until you come down to here, and there's a little word called C, which is critical excess electric production. Critical excess electric production is power that you not only didn't need, but you couldn't find another use for, and that you have to export or get rid of or curtail. You're shut the wind down next. Okay, no, we're not going to talk through this. But I just wanted to point out that the inputs, you have to put in data on the demand, the renewable energy systems, capacities and efficiencies of all the components of storage. Transportation is a part of this. Fuel costs, these are the financial inputs. And then over here, these are the outputs that you get. Electrical production that talks about heat and produces graphs like this and tables like that. We're not going to be looking at those next week. All right, this is, if you want to know PV, if there's anybody who knows, there's a lot of people here who know about solar. What's the difference between this graph of solar and what we have in New England? This is January. Not much going on in January. Right? Same thing here. I looked at a tour book to learn about Denmark, and I found out that they have an average of 1 hour of sunlight a day in January. Next. You'll notice in this year they had 2083 and 1964 megawatt hours per megawatt of installed capacity. And if you look at this is 8800, I'm sorry. My eyes are really not good. 87, it's 8800 hours roughly, and you'll notice, let's see, there's 6, 8, 10, so these are a little bit more than a month. So you can see you have really strong wind for a while, and this is like a week or two. So you have times when you don't have much, and then you get a lot. Next. Okay, this is demand data. You'll notice that there's more demand in the winter than there is in the summer, and that's partly because of heat, but it's also because of electric lighting is on a lot more. This is from the year 2000, and there hadn't been a lot of heat pumps installed in district yet. The other feature I want to point out to you is, you see this little gap here? That's the weekend. Next. So this is a similar slide for 5 days, I think. This is demand. And then what happened? This one's smaller, and so on. You know what day this is?
Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday.
Monday. Yep. And then this is your wind. You go down to nothing. If you look at the steepness of this and compare it with the steepness of this, sometimes the wind looks like it's steeper, and your ramping capability of cogeneration and central plants would have to be better because of the slope, because of the speed of the change. But actually what happens is, as that change comes across the landscape, some of the wind will see it at different times. And when you look at other graphs, it's not as bad. Now, this one is solar, so you expect it to go down. This is probably in the United States. Here's a more typical, this is a full sun day. This is sort of a, okay, next. All right, am I at 10 minutes past 8?
Yep.
All right.
6 cuts.
When Michael Higgins put up the first description, he told us that I was going to talk about moving renewables penetration from 50 to 100%. But actually, that is chapter 6 of this book. Chapter 5 is what this talk is. Remember when I told you about the homes?
What's the name of the book?
I'll get to it. I forgot to read this. When I was talking about the homes, I should have read this. And I know the person who wrote this. My wife, I had been talking about living in a place where it had been 50 degrees in the cold part of the winter. And I made some changes, and it's now 55 in the winter. My wife and I live with warm room concept to a significant extent. And also, I mostly live around 45 degrees to 50 degrees. She lives more at about 51 degrees. And then he underlines this, there are quite a few number of people who do this who are not poor. And I want to thank John Carlton-Foss for writing this to me. Because if we don't get on the program, there's going to be a huge number of people in this country who are faced with this reality. And that's why I wanted to read it. Kind of a little motivation. All right. So what's this? This is actually, I have 2 slides that have to do with 100% renewables. This was done by a guy at a different place than the author of the book, which is called Renewable Energy Systems. And this guy's book is called Fuel Cells and Hydrogen. And he's done model runs. This is demand, Danish demand, which we've seen. And this is the wind that's required to make the system 100% renewable before you dig into biomass. So obviously, if you could do half of it with biomass, you would have the wind be, instead of being this high, would be only this high. Next. All right, and this is just 5 days, a week, showing, I know you can barely see it, but this is demand. Here's the weekend demand. And then another Monday and Tuesday. And if you look at the ratio between the average and the peak is like 5 times the average load. I'm sorry, yeah, the peak. So that gives you an idea, if you really want to think about 100% renewables before you put in your biomass, this is the kind of challenge that you've got. It's a big challenge. So I didn't want to try to cover that. Next. This is the spot price. I don't have time to talk about it, but this is part of the input to the economic part. Go ahead. All right, I want to spend a little bit of time on this, and part of it I've already done in that little stand over here. Here's electric production. This is the electric bus, the grid. All of the stuff below the line is stuff that can use electric power, and all of the stuff up here makes it. These are micro CHPs, industrial. I won't mention those. These are the CHPs in the district heat. These are the central power plants. They still have, all of this is in energy plants. And then renewables, all kinds of renewables. And then we have demand, electric heat. This is the the electric boiler and the electric heat pump, cooling loads, and I won't go into any more of it because it will distract me and slow me down. Next slide. The next one is heat. You have to balance electric because electric wires don't store kilowatt hours. You have to make it exactly balanced with when you use it. It's like a big shaft that connects everything in the distribution, everything in the electric grid is like on this shaft that has 60 cycle characteristic. And if you slow it down, you have to speed it up. And there isn't a lot of inertia in it. Only the spinning stuff that's inside the power plants is what keeps that thing. And so you got to be on top of your game to make this. It's probably the 8th or 9th wonder of the world. And that shaft for eastern Massachusetts covers everything east of the Mississippi River. So here's your CHP making heat, boilers, both kinds, heat pumps, electric. We've been through this. But I wanted to, here's your heat demand. Biogas, I'm not going to talk about that, it will distract me. No, I'm not going to talk about that. That's chapter 6. Okay, on we go. Okay, I'm going to read this, and I've been told never to do this, but you only have to tolerate me reading this one slide like this. Flexible energy systems to reduce excess electric production. This is the introductory slide to the model runs. Now it's quarter past, right? No, 20 past.
Quarter past.
Okay. I should be done in a half an hour. Energy plan software simulates energy systems, but they simulate the infrastructure. It's not just an electric grid program or a building mechanical systems program. It does transportation and all kinds of components that we only have sitting in the laboratory that some companies are trying to get out the door. It's an incredible piece of work that Denmark. I have so much. You know, there was a time when I understood a lot of what I'm talking about, but I hadn't put together the electric and the heat piece the way they have. And I knew that if I stood up in front of an audience like you and talked about it from my own study and my own experience, that a third of you would have walked out the door. And you wouldn't, and the rest of you wouldn't have believed me. But this is a whole country that's been working on this problem for 10 years. This is really an amazing resource. This is going to save us huge amounts of time if we can get students at our universities working on this thing, and if we can get a hold of that German model, they'll be able to do even better work, because the Danish model is hourly simulation. There, I've lost one man. Bye-bye. and the German model does 5-minute simulations. Flexible systems can increase the integration of fluctuating renewables from 20 to 50 or even 60% of annual energy. Okay, here we go. This is the fun part. This has pictures. This is, I don't know where this is. Some of the district heating plants are only for 150 families, and some of them are for a whole city, but generally in cities in Denmark there are several district heating plants. Like in Copenhagen, which I think is 500,000 people, there are 3 or 4 really large plants and then a bunch of small ones. This is a 1-story industrial building, and this one's 2 stories with a bigger hall. And you'll see in back here, there's a taller part. So this is probably a district heating. Notice that these look like they're out in the middle of nowhere. In Denmark, they put district heating systems into subdivisions with quarter-acre lots. That's not happening in the United States. Where it happens in the United States, we've done townhouse blocks. We have every 18 to 21 feet is another unit. And also garden apartments. Next. All right. So, I think it's 2004, I'm going to describe to you the results which are presented in 3 separate papers. Those papers written by the staff at Aalborg at the Department of Planning and Development, where the software was written. Those 3 papers are presented in Chapter 5 of Henrik Lund's book. And what they did was they took the work of the government, which had written a proposal for the future to get to 50% renewables by 2030, and you're going to see 3 of these. I don't want you to focus on this or this. I'm only going to talk about this one. So this plan was written in 1995. So we'll forgive the government, but there were things that were already known. And so by the time we get to 50%, you'll notice in this particular, this block here, the stuff on the left-hand side is production. Is that right? It's consumption. That's, so this black area is critical excess electric production. Steep. I don't call it that. But this is the stuff they had to waste to throw away or export. And so that's consumption. And what they were using was they had this much wind, and look how they got to 50%. This is CH, because a lot of the CHP is fired with straw, which is bundled. They have special machines for it. So you'll very little heat pump on this side, surplus production. You're going to see 2 more that are like this. That's why I'm going so slow. And so even by 2030, even the government plans to reduce the amount of power plants, central power plants, that do not do heat recovery from this amount to this amount. Which is, that's serious progress. The place where they're not doing things is here. Okay, next. Now, this is a little busy. This is where, remember I told you, I'm going to tell you something, then I'm going to tell you something, and I'm going to tell you. This is where I tell you. This is this section. At the end, I'm going to have one slide that tells you what I'm saying. But what do you think this is?
Export. Excess.
Well, yeah, so it's export. So this is critical on excess electric production in April. Denmark has a design day heat load less than ours, but their winter is longer. They have about the same number of degree days as we do. So this here is consumer load. Here's Saturday and Sunday, Monday, right? Is a week. And look what happens here. The wind drops down enough so that there's no critical excess electric production on that day. The way, at this time, this is on a government plan, they anticipated that the regulation of combined heat and power plants and district heating was going to be the same as it is today. I'm sorry, the same as it had been, no changes. Well, what do they run? Well, take a look at this. Even when we have lots of wind here and very little excess here, look at the height from here to here. It's CHP. Well, they look almost exactly the same height. There go with the warning. What they do is, as long as there's a call for heat, the CHP must run even if there's no need for the electricity. Because in cogeneration still in the United States, you want to use all the electricity and you want to use all the heat and you want to run the cogenerator 24/7 because that's the way you make the most income. And that's what happens in hospitals. But in Denmark, they had this problem. So going out to 2030, the government program didn't fix them. And that's why there's that huge black square in the bar graph that I just showed you. How many of you understand some of what I just said? Okay, we're making progress. All right, let's take a look at July. All right, July, if you take a look at this, you'll see that the heat call in July is much lower. There's still heating load in June. So a lot of this is industrial and domestic hot water. But see, it's going all the time. And see how fat these wind peaks are? You have excess electric production even in the summer. Whoa. All right, next. So here's a picture of a heat recovery heat pump. In Europe, they do not like using freon, even hydrogen fluorocarbons. They don't like to use them because they're a strong greenhouse gas. So there's a big move in Europe to go to what they call natural refrigerants, which are propane, butane, ammonia, and carbon dioxide. This is an ammonia plant. And ammonia is a high pressure refrigerant to use as a heat pump. Right now, the gas compressors can only give you about 100 degrees centigrade, 210 or 12 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's what this is doing. This is the kind of compressor they use. This is producing about the equivalent of a megawatt thermal, which is 3,400,000 BTUs. Did I get that right? I'm beginning to wax and wane. Next. All right. So what do they do? This is the IDA, which is the District Heating Engineers Association. It's the Danish Engineers Association. They wrote a different proposal, and they used the resources at Aalborg University with energy plan to do the models. And you'll see that the excess electric production, even in 2030, is much less. The wind is much more, and the requirements for combined heat and power are less, and the power plants are less, and more heat pumps. What did they also do here? They simulated the regulation of voltage and frequency, not only in the combined heat and power plants, but also in the wind machines. So you could carry the whole grid and not need 30% of the supply on large plants which were easy to modulate. I'm not talking about nuclear or large coal, I'm talking about gas. Because for 20 years they've had North Sea gas, which is one of the reasons that they've been able to do this. So the big changes are heat pumps, fuel boilers, electric boilers, and dispatch. That is to say, groups of these combined heat and power units can in fact be dispatched as a group. And some of those can be modulated up and down to control voltage and frequency for grid stability. All right. So that's 2030. All right, next. So here we have our old friend. This is the demand side. You'll see that the wind, the transport, that also had transport in it. The transport was modeled as a combination between battery-operated vehicles, plug-in hybrids, and some hydrogen vehicles. The battery vehicles were operated in a vehicle-to-grid so that when they were plugged into the wall socket, the utility could use them as a kind of shuttle energy storage on less than a full day cycle. And here you can see we're in April. So you see the CHP varies. There's very little bit here, and then it kind of gets big. And what's this black? Power plants. So they brought in the power plants. The wind went way down. So the power plants aren't even sitting on the grid all the time. There's a lot of the time in this picture when the combined heat and power and the wind are carrying the whole thing. And that's just, you try to get that across to ISO in New England or Western Mass Electric. Goodbye, Charlie. We'll see you before the DPU, and we'll probably end up in court. But that's how amazing their vision of the future is. You know, it's a different grid. And they're even talking about a cellular grid where you can do the same stuff with less copper, where it's the wind machines that are near you that are powering the towns that are near the machines. It's not microgrids because, and I don't have time to talk about why microgrids are expensive, and we're probably privy to wealthy people concerned more than the average homeowner about 24/7 fail not service. Next. And this is July. Next. Okay. I think I got something out of order. This is the one that combines transportation and the grid stabilization. Next. All right. This is a typical 6-cylinder engine. These are 10 to 14 liters. They're mass-produced all over the world. There's a huge number of these. And the Danish people in their district heating systems tend only to use, what's the time now?
8:30.
Okay. I'm doing okay. I'm going to finish on time. If some of you have questions, please stop me. They don't like to buy equipment that can't be put on the flatbed of a tractor-trailer truck or fit inside a shipping container. And they don't like to buy equipment that's custom. So this thing comes out of the factory, and it's been tested. And it gets a control box, and the control box does all the stuff that you specified that it had to do. Is it going to have to do voltage and frequency control? Is it going to have to be dispatched? Is it going to respond to a real-time price on spot price on electricity? Is it going to be able to do all of these things, or just select? Whoops. All right. Now, this is the last difficult thing that is here. This is the most important part. One of the outputs of energy plan for the simulation, the specific simulation that you did, call it an alternative or a choice. In the national infrastructure, you can do, in the United States, you could do states, you could do counties. As long as you can get the data, you can do regional or statewide simulation. And one of the outputs is excess electricity production. So we're talking about 50%. All of what I'm going to say assumes 50%. This is 50%, because that is all of these graphs, it turns out, the graphs go to the right-hand side, and that's the annual energy, electrical energy consumed for the region. And in this case, it's 25 terawatt hours, which is, I think, 12 zeros after 25. And this is also in terawatt hours. And in the old method, where you had to run the CHP, anytime there's a heat call, you're sitting at 12.5 terawatt hours, and you've got 7 terawatt hours of excess electric production. Even worse than the IDA model of the Energy 21 plan from the government. And if you implement boiler regulations, which is where you run your CHP on electric call and then supplement with a fuel boiler, you have only about 4 terawatt hours out of 12.5, which is a lot better